Before we get into tonight's stories, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I write these from New Jersey, and every time I see how far they travel, it genuinely surprises me. Let me know you're out there. I'd been playing Sunday League for about 6 years by the time this happened. Same team, same council pitch on the edge of town, same 9 o'clock kickoffs that required an alarm set for 7 on a weekend, which my wife never let me forget. It was the kind of setup you find everywhere in the North. Portable changing rooms that smelled like mildew no matter the season. One referee who moonlighted as a PE teacher at the local secondary. A cold water tap outside that nobody used because the pressure was basically decorative. We weren't good. We finished mid-table most years and considered that a moral victory. The pitch backed onto a canal on one side and a housing estate on the other. These canals were dug by hand centuries ago. Men with shovels moving through the northern countryside to connect mills and factories. Horses walking the towpath to haul loaded barges that would take weeks to make a journey a lorry does in an afternoon now. In summer, it was actually a decent spot. Narrow boats drifting past, dog walkers on the same towpath. The horses wore smooth, kids fishing off the lock. In late October, it was gray and still, and the water looked the color of old concrete. That's the time of year this happened. That detail stuck with me for some reason. How flat everything looked that morning. We won that day, which was unusual enough that I remember it. 3-2, a late penalty. The opposition took it well. Decent group of lads drove over from Rochdale Way. They were packing up their corner flags when I noticed they were a man short. Their usual helper hadn't shown, and there were 4 flags to carry and only 3 of them. And they were doing that thing where everyone looks at each other and nobody moves. I'd already texted my wife to say I was heading home. I told her never mind, give me 20 minutes, and I went over to help. It didn't take long. We carried the flags back to their van. They thanked me. We said the things you say. Good game, bad referee, same time next season. By the time they drove off and I turned around, my own teammates were long gone. I hadn't noticed them leaving. The car park was empty except for my car. The pitch was empty. The portable changing room was padlocked. It was about 10:30 in the morning, and there was no one around in any direction. I had my kit bag over my shoulder and my keys in my hand, and I was maybe 50 meters from my car when I saw it. A holdall sitting just inside the halfway line. Not a kit bag, not the kind of thing anyone brings to a Sunday League match. A civilian bag, dark green canvas, the kind you'd take to the gym or use for a weekend away somewhere. It was sitting upright, like someone had placed it there deliberately, and there was mud caked on the bottom. Not fresh mud, dried and darkened, the kind that takes at least a day or 2 to set like that. My first thought was that someone had left it from the day before. Maybe a Saturday match. Maybe it had been there all morning and none of us had noticed. Which sounds strange, but the bag was dark and we'd been focused on the game and it was just inside the halfway line, far enough from both ends that nobody had reason to go near it. I walked over. I don't know exactly why. Curiosity, I suppose, and that low-level civic instinct that makes you pick up someone else's litter. I crouched down and unzipped it. There were clothes inside, folded, not thrown in, not packed in a hurry. Folded the way you'd fold them if you were putting them away in a drawer. A pair of jeans on the bottom, a gray sweatshirt on top of that, a t-shirt underneath, a pair of socks rolled together the way my mom used to roll mine when I was a kid. And on top of everything, placed with the same deliberateness as everything else, a pair of white trainers. Clean. Laces tucked inside. There was a wallet resting on top of the shoes. I picked it up and opened it. Cards still in the slots. Bank card, Tesco club card, a library card from the local council. £23 in cash, 2 10s and 3 1s. A receipt from a jet petrol station dated 4 days earlier. Nothing had been touched. I found the phone in the side pocket. The screen was cracked, but it still had charge. 17 missed calls, all from the same contact. The contact was saved as Mum in capitals like that, the way some people do it. 17 calls. I stood there holding it for a moment. The most recent missed call was from that morning. 6:42 a.m. I called the police from my own phone, told them what I'd found and where I was. They said someone would come out. I stood next to the bag and waited. It was cold and very quiet, and the canal was maybe 30 meters away across the towpath. I'm not sure what made me walk over to it. I think I was just moving, the way you do when you're uncomfortable standing still. I walked to the edge of the towpath and looked down at the bank. The bank sloped down to the waterline. Grass mostly worn away in patches to bare earth, and there were scuff marks on the bare earth near the water's edge. Not from today. The ground around them was dry and undisturbed. But there they were. 2 parallel drag marks, each about the width of a shoe, running from a point about a meter up the bank down to the water and stopping at the surface. I stepped back from the edge. I didn't walk any closer to examine them. I went back to the halfway line and stood next to the bag and looked at my phone without really seeing it. The police came about 40 minutes later. 2 officers, both younger than me. They asked the questions you'd expect. They took the bag, the phone, and my name and number. One of them walked over to the canal and stood at the bank for a while without saying anything. When he came back, he wrote something in his notebook and didn't share it with me. I asked if they thought something had happened to someone. The officer looked at me in that measured way they're trained to and said they'd look into it and be in touch if they needed anything further. They weren't in touch. I don't know if that means nothing happened, or if it means they found what they were looking for and I was no longer relevant to it. I've looked at the local news from that period a few times since. I don't know what name to search for. I don't know what I'm hoping to find, or not find. I still play Sunday League, same pitch. I always park in the same spot out of habit, which puts my car closest to the towpath end. I try not to be the last one to leave anymore, but sometimes it just works out that way. When it does, I don't go near the halfway line on my way back to the car. I go around the long way, up the side of the pitch, even if it adds 5 minutes. I don't think about why I do that. It's easier not to. The year I lived in Buenos Aires, I was 26 and making decisions the way you do at that age. Quickly, with incomplete information, and with a confidence that only makes sense in retrospect. I'd finished my master's degree and taken a year out, teaching English at a language school in Palermo, sharing a flat with 2 other women I'd found through an expat forum. It was a good year, disorienting in the way that living somewhere foreign always is, but good. About 4 months in, my colleague Rodrigo mentioned the ticket. He taught the advanced business classes at the school and had been trying to explain super classico culture to me since roughly my first week. Boca versus river. He said it the way you'd say something obvious, like the name alone should settle any question I had. His cousin had a spare. Someone had dropped out last minute. And did I want it? Mixed section, he said, which I didn't fully understand at the time. I said yes, mostly because I'd been saying yes to things that year as a general policy. La Bombonera is not a large stadium by modern standards, but it feels enormous when it's full. The noise is physical. I remember standing at the entrance to my section and just stopping for a moment because the sound hit me before anything else. This layered, continuous roar that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I found my seat and spent the first 10 minutes just looking around. The man who sat next to me arrived just before kickoff. Mid-30s, ordinary-looking, gray jacket, no club colors. He settled in quickly, and within a few minutes we'd exchanged the kind of minimal pleasantries that strangers at matches exchange. A comment about the atmosphere. Something about the teams. His English was good, accented but comfortable. He asked if it was my first Superclásico. I said yes. He smiled and said, "You'll remember this one." He was good company in a low-key way, knew the game well, explained a few things without being condescending, pointed out a player I should watch. We weren't talking constantly, just the natural back and forth that happens when two strangers are watching something together, and the momentum of the game gives you things to react to. I didn't think anything of him. That's the part I keep coming back to. He was completely, utterly ordinary. At halftime, I went to the concourse for water. The queues were long, and by the time I got back, the second half had already kicked off. His seat was empty. I assumed he'd left early. Maybe he had somewhere to be. I put my water bottle in my jacket pocket and turned my attention back to the game. The second half was intense enough that I stopped thinking about him entirely. Boca scored with about 20 minutes to go, and the section around me went up in a way that was more frightening than joyful. That sudden surge of bodies, people grabbing each other, the roar so loud it was almost silence. I got caught in it and just tried to keep my footing. After the final whistle, the crowd moved toward the exits in that slow, pressurized way that feels like being carried rather than walking. I was out on the street maybe 15 minutes later. I found a quieter side street and reached for my phone. It wasn't in my jacket pocket. I checked my bag. I checked every pocket twice. It was gone. A woman nearby saw my face and said something in Spanish. Then she looked at me more carefully and switched to English. I explained what happened. She let me use her phone. I called my bank and canceled my cards, standing on a cobbled street in La Boca at 10 o'clock at night. I reported it to the police the next morning, more out of obligation than hope. "Pickpocketing at the Superclásico," the officer said, with a look that suggested he was restraining himself from saying something further. I bought a cheap replacement SIM and a basic handset the same day. Gave the number to my flatmates and the school and nobody else. 4 days later, a message came through on that number from an Argentine code I didn't recognize. In English, "Hi, found something with your name on it at the estadio. How can I return it?" I stared at that for a long time. Nobody had that number. The only thing with my name on it was my driving license, which I kept in the case on the back of my phone. I asked what they'd found. They sent a photo. My driving license on a concrete floor, my name and face visible. I asked where. They said the concourse, near the food stalls at halftime. I didn't respond after that. Whoever took my phone had removed my license from the case before ditching it, dropped it separately, deliberately, in the halftime crowd. They wanted the phone and whatever was on it. They didn't want me knowing the license was gone until it was too late to matter. The man in the gray jacket left before I got back from the concourse. I've thought about that timing a lot since. Whether he left because the job was already done, whether he was ever involved at all. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that someone in that crowd had identified me, positioned themselves next to me for an entire half of football, and waited. And when the moment came, the surge, 50,000 people all moving at once. They were ready for it. How patient that requires a person to be. I'd been refereeing Sunday League for about 11 years by the time this happened. It was never a career thing. I played until my knee gave out at 34, and refereeing was just a way to stay close to the game. $40 a match, 2 matches on a good weekend, enough to cover gas and a decent lunch. My wife thought it was funny that I'd trade one form of abuse for another. She wasn't wrong. The match that day was about 40 minutes from home. A town called Millhaven, the kind of place you pass through on a state highway without registering. A grain elevator, a feed store, a diner with a hand-painted sign. The pitch was behind the middle school, regulation size, decent surface, one set of aluminum bleachers on the home side. I'd done matches out there maybe twice before, years apart. Nothing about it stood out. I got there early, 30 minutes before kickoff, walked the pitch, checked the lines, and introduced myself to both coaches. There were maybe 20 people scattered along the touchlines when I arrived. Family groups mostly. A few kids running around near the bleachers. Normal Sunday morning stuff. I did my walk, spoke to the coaches, got my card and whistle sorted, and didn't think about anything except the match. He was on the far touchline when I first noticed him. Not with either team's group, standing maybe 20 meters from the nearest cluster of parents, hands in his jacket pockets, just watching. Somewhere in his 40s, I'd guess, average build, dark jacket, a cap pulled low. Nothing remarkable. I registered him in my peripheral vision during a match, briefly, then gone. The game was physical. A derby of some kind, local rivalry, both coaches riding me from the first whistle. I gave a penalty in the second half that the home side disagreed with, and spent the last 20 minutes being followed up and down the touchline by their assistant coach, telling me exactly what he thought of my decision-making and my family. Standard stuff. I've heard worse. When the final whistle went, I was ready to be done. I did the handshakes, took the usual muttered comments from the losing side, and walked back toward the far end where I'd left my bag near the corner flag. I was getting my stuff together when I realized the man in the dark jacket was standing about 15 meters away. Not approaching, just standing there watching me pack up. I glanced at him. He didn't look away, just kept watching with this flat, patient expression like he was waiting for something. I looked around. Most people had already moved toward the car park. The coaches were talking near the center circle. Nobody was paying attention to that end of the pitch. I picked up my bag and walked toward the car park. Normal pace. I wasn't sure what I was feeling exactly. Not quite threatened, just uncomfortable in that low-level way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. Like a sound you can't place. I looked back once. He was following at a distance. Still the same flat expression. Still not hurrying. I got to my car, a blue Jeep Cherokee, got in, locked the doors. I sat for a moment and looked in the mirror. He was standing at the edge of the car park, maybe 30 meters back, watching my car. Just standing there with his hands in his pockets. I started the engine and pulled out. When I got to the lot exit, I checked the mirror again. He was still standing there, still watching. I took the state highway home. Flat road, straight farm fields on both sides. About 10 minutes out of Millhaven, I noticed a dark pickup a few cars back. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I slowed down to just under the limit. The cars between us passed me, and after a moment, the pickup slowed too, dropping back to maintain the same distance, My hands were very steady on the wheel, which I remember noticing because the rest of me wasn't. I didn't go home. I drove to a gas station on the edge of my town, the big well-lit one on Route 9, and pulled in and sat in the lot with the engine running. After about 4 minutes, the pickup drove past on the highway without slowing. Dark color, mud on the plates. I couldn't get the full number. I sat there for another 20 minutes before I drove home. I told my wife some of it, not all of it. She asked if I wanted to call the police, and I thought about what I'd say. A man stood near me at a soccer match and then drove behind me on a public highway. And I said no. I pretty much talked myself out of it over the next few days. Coincidence? Paranoia. You spend 11 years getting yelled at by strangers on touchlines, and you develop a persecution complex. It's an occupational hazard. By the following weekend, I'd mostly let it go. The envelope came on a Tuesday. Plain white, no return address, my name and home address handwritten on the front in block capitals. Inside was a single photograph. No note, no message, nothing else. It was my house. Taken from the street, from the sidewalk in front of the neighbor's yard based on the angle. My blue Jeep in the driveway, my wife's car behind it. The front door, the porch light, the flag my wife puts out in summer. All of it clear and sharp and recognizable. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was from 3 weeks before the match in Millhaven. I stood in my kitchen holding that photograph for a long time, 3 weeks before, which meant whatever this was, it didn't start at that pitch. It started somewhere else, at some other match, on some other Sunday morning when I was walking lines and checking cards and not paying attention to who was watching from the Far Touchline. I called the police that afternoon, filed a report, gave them the envelope, described the man and the pickup as best I could. They were thorough and took it seriously. They told me to document anything further and to call immediately if I felt in danger. Nothing further came. No more envelopes, no more pickups on the highway, nothing. I don't know if the report scared him off or if he just decided to stop. I don't know which of those possibilities bothers me more. I still referee. Different towns when I can manage it. Rarely the same place twice in a row. I get there early the way I always have. I walk the pitch, check the lines, introduce myself to the coaches. And I always know where the Far Touchline is. I always know who's standing on it. If these stories kept you up tonight, my psychological thriller audiobooks are on this channel. Full length, same dark tone, completely free. Start with The Husband. Link in the description.